In all of nature's grand chronicles of luminescence, the wandering glow of winged creatures seems perpetually bound to the opulence of midsummer. We always presume that their intermittent, flickering brilliance should endure without end. Yet, when the very last fallen leaf of the black forest was blanketed in hoarfrost, and slender ribbons of smoke began to curl from the chimney of a secluded log cabin, a single firefly made the most anomalous choice. Rather than surrendering to the despair of a late autumn slumber like his peers, he flew against the freezing night wind, charting a treacherous course toward a window pane that bathed the dark in a soft, orange glow. Tonight, by the gentle, dancing glow of the hearth, let us immerse ourselves in this tale that requires no effort to remember, and wander together into the true chronicle of his life. This firefly was known to the creatures of the woods as El. He was once the champion of summer nights, flying the highest and shining with the crispest luster, his existence originally nothing less than a grand, protracted crusade against the dark. Yet at this very moment, he sheds all the hubris of flight, perching in absolute stillness upon the golden center of a German chamomile flower resting on the window sill. No longer forcing himself to ignite his tiny beacon against the shadows, he allows his freezing body to be enveloped, layer by layer, by a gentle, honey-sweet apple aroma, discovering a sanctuary of long-lost peace. This is by no means a tragic end filled with regret, but rather a warm harbor he had long contemplated and willingly embraced, a midnight parable of letting go, of healing, and of returning to the absolute quietude of the earth. The fractures of destiny often manifest at the precise moment the daytime splendor prepares to take its bow. For El, it occurred on the morning following the final, torrential cloudburst of midsummer. In those days, El possessed the most pristine luminescent abdomen in the entire forest. His wings could skim the surface of a pond without triggering a single ripple. He was the undisputed pride of the nocturnal world. Within the realm of fireflies, the intensity of one's glow dictated absolute authority and the very dignity of survival. Driven by primal instinct, they were forced to flash incessantly within the dense thickets, competing for a fleeting moment of recognition. El had once devoutly revered this cosmic law, believing the entirety of existence was boiled down to being the brightest star in the dark, until the day he collapsed from utter exhaustion, tumbling into the back garden of a human cottage. It was a rustic cabin fashioned from raw timber. The air held none of the decay and bloody competition of the deep woods, harboring instead a faint, bittersweet aroma infused with the scent of damp soil. In a quiet corner of the garden, a vast patch of seemingly unremarkable white blossoms bloomed in silence, their golden centers rising like miniature domes, beautifully stoic under the morning light. These were the German chamomiles, legendary as the physicians of the plant kingdom. They grew with a patient, unhurried grace. Even after being ruthlessly battered by the previous night's storm, their leaves continued to exhale a fragrance that smoothed away all anxiety. Lying weak upon the damp earth, El watched as a solitary chamomile plant bent its slender stalk in the breeze, using its velvet-soft petals to gently brush away the muddy streaks marring his wings. The touch bore no hostility, nor did it carry the mechanical efficiency of a hive or an anthill. It was an unreserved, tender consolation that simply granted him permission to be vulnerable. The tension that had tightly gripped El's body for so long dissolved into an uncontrollable release. For the first time, he discovered that when one does not try so desperately to shine, the world can become so beautifully still. The days following his return from that garden to the deep woods shifted into something uncomfortably different. The endless, frantic courtships and competitions of his colony began to weigh on El as a sense of inescapable vacuum. Whenever night fell, tens of thousands of his peers flashed their neon-green beacons with manic intensity within the brushwood. Though the spectacle was magnificent, it was thick with anxiety and a desperate fear of the dark. Walking along the fringes of this torrent of light, El gazed at his comrades who perished before the dawn from overexerting their life force. Suddenly, an immense wave of desolation washed over him. While his physical form continued to execute the instinctual command to shine, his heart remained anchored beneath that window sill flanked with German chamomile, floating upon that apple-sweet air. The law of the wilderness was unforgiving. When elderly fireflies found their lights dimming, they were ruthlessly cast out to the freezing peripheries, left at the mercy of icy rains that stripped away their final remnants of warmth. El began to deliberately ration the frequency of his glow. He stopped attending those zealous nocturnal congregations, choosing instead to use the shroud of twilight to fly toward that little timber cottage. During these long journeys, he began to notice the rhythmic tapping of dew dropping from pine needles, he began to comprehend the subtle, cracking murmurs of wood burning in the fireplace, delicate details he had rigidly bypassed in his past pursuit of the spotlight. He established a silent, unspoken understanding with the potted German chamomile kept on the windowsill. Nurtured by the indoor warmth, the plant thrived beautifully, its fragrance now carrying a comforting trace of the hearth. Whenever Elle landed weary against the outside of the glass, the chamomile would filter its cool, soothing aroma through the thin mesh of the screen, tenderly wiping away his exhaustion. In these brief interludes of companionship, Elle had no need to care whether he was fading into obscurity. Guided merely by the thread of this perfume, he rediscovered the anchor of his inner tranquility. The footsteps of autumn advanced faster than anticipated. A freezing northern gale swept away the remaining warmth of midsummer overnight, turning the sighing of the pine forest heavy and solemn. The firefly population within the woods began to perish en masse. They flashed their dying, feeble sparks helplessly amidst the golden heaps of fallen leaves, before finally dissolving into a cold, absolute silence. The margins of Elle's wings began to stiffen from the bitter cold. His luminescent abdomen struggled to organize a single perfect flash. Every breath he drew felt like a quiet ebbing of his life force. On an evening heavy with the promise of a looming blizzard, the master of the cottage gently pushed open the wooden window, preparing to bring the potted chamomile deeper into the warmth of the room. The exact instant the window parted by a hair's breadth, Elle summoned the absolute last of his strength. Like a kite with a severed string, he battled the escaping current of heat and tumbled clumsily into the room. The world inside the cabin was warm, resembling a distant, ethereal dreamscape. Pine logs in the stone hearth crackled softly with dancing orange flames, broadcasting a deeply reassuring rhythm. A thick woolen rug blanketed the timber floor, and the atmosphere was a comforting melange of seasoned wood, the hazy steam of hot tea, and that rich, tender chamomile fragrance that commanded the entire space. Elle dropped onto the golden dome of the flower heart. After a grueling autumn of wandering, his fragile frame finally established contact with the absolute security he had craved for so long. Outside, the blizzard began to howl, lashing against the heavy glass panes with muted, thudding violence, yet none of it could inflict the slightest harm upon this minuscule creature. Within this cozy domain insulated by firelight and blossom scent, Elle slowly flattened his body against the petals. He knew that, ahead of the long, unyielding winter, he had finally discovered his true haven. Midnight in the cabin brought an exquisite silence, only the occasional tumbling of embers within the hearth spoke of the passage of time, while the vintage wall clock marched on untiringly. Cradled in the center of the German chamomile petals, where the temperature was perfectly mild, the honey-sweet apple scent acted like a pair of invisible hands, smoothing away the deep-seated trauma of his soul, touch by touch. He tested his antennae and found that the frostbite earned from his long war against the cold had ceased to throb. That profound relaxation blooming from every individual cell left him beautifully intoxicated. Had this occurred in his past life within the woods, such absolute surrender would signify the collapse of all defenses, an invitation to be claimed by nocturnal predators, a declaration of the end. But here, resting within the embrace of the botanical physician, inside this cottage cut off from the noise of the world, all dangers and anxieties dissolved into nothingness. He no longer needed to force a glow just to validate his existence, nor did he have to deplete his essence for the propagation of his colony. Every shred of his social identity was stripped away in this sacred hour. He was no longer a firefly carrying the burdensome mandate of light, he was merely a speck of dust within this room, a pure, unadulterated life form quietly savoring warmth amidst the sweet breath of the chamomile. The golden core of the blossom exhaled a delicate herbal remedy, that fragrance held a mystical power, capable of erasing the clamor of the daytime and submerging the spirit into the deepest abyss of serenity. Elle closed his compound eyes entirely, burying his body deep between those snow-white, delicate petals, letting the soft, dancing cadence of the hearth fire steal away the very last of his waking consciousness. As the morning sun pierced through the frost-framed window panes, scattering flakes of spun gold across the chamomile pot, the black forest outside had transformed into a world cloaked entirely in silent silver. At the center of those ivory petals, Elle lay in absolute stillness. His miniature form no longer emitted any light, yet he maintained a posture that was beautifully uncurled, loose, and profoundly serene. The embers in the hearth had burned to ash, but the room retained the residual warmth of seasoned timber and that stubborn, unevaporated aroma of sweet chamomile tea. He did not perish in the brutal wilderness, nor was he swallowed by frost within a lonely mound of leaves. Cradled by the warmest sanctuary, he completed his most tender valediction to this world. The enigma of why he chose to extinguish his final beam on the bitterest day would likely never be understood by his peers in the forest. They would merely sigh over his self-imposed exile. Yet to this log cabin, and to this specific German chamomile that had kept vigil over him through the night, L left behind a secretive, beautiful resonance of trust, surrender, and deep healing. Through his final night, he proved that the most elegant curtain call of existence is not frantically burning out at one's peak, but gracefully permitting oneself to touch down within a warm, designated home. A gentle breeze nudged the sheer curtains, and the sweet apple scent of the chamomile drifted through the space once more, carrying away all noise and weariness, leaving behind a crystalline, perfect hush. Now, this tale that requires no effort to remember has reached its destination, and that chamomile fragrance, laden with the residual warmth of the hearth, seems to be drifting softly into your dreamscape. The dark night outside has surrendered to absolute tranquility. Relinquish all your tightly wound thoughts, like the little firefly who found his home within the petals. Let yourself drift into a peaceful, heavy, and deep sleep.